Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 37th chapter in the book of Genesis. This marks the beginning of where Joseph replaces his father Jacob as the human protagonist of the book of Genesis. And the story of Joseph can be read in three ways, one of which is literature, and there's nothing wrong with this approach. It is a dramatic unfolding of literature of a doted-on child, a spoiling father, envious brothers, and a jail, and then a nation to feed. But what I also want to suggest is one can read it as with the lens of seeing the hands of providence working through those events. So there was all providentially arranged. In other words, he just didn't go down to the dungeon into the palace. It was all arranged as a refining practice from the one above him. And the third and final way I want to recommend is to view in this as an illustration of Yahshua Messiah, who would be the best and the brightest and the most righteous among the tribes of Israel, who would leave him for dead. They thought they killed him. They literally didn't. But he would be left for dead and tried to be killed, and he would rise from the dungeon to the palace, thus exemplifying the Messiah's rise from the grave to the right hand of the throne in heaven. Joseph found himself at the right hand of the throne, Pharaoh, and through that he saved people from starvation, much as he saves us from sin. So the opening verse reads, "And Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan." Now, in the previous 36th chapter, we read of Esau and his descendants, and the picture that is left is kind of that he's doing well. He's advancing in power and prestige in the geopolitical world in which the nation that he's about to sire exist in, but Jacob is dwelling as a foreigner, and his blessings takes patience. So Esau was worldly minded. There are shortcuts to happiness and success and achievement in the world, but the ultimate achievement comes from waiting patiently for the blessing to be bestowed. So he's in the land of Canaan. This was the land that had been promised to his grandfather Abraham, and that is where they are right now. And then the next verse reads, "This is the genealogy of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the young man was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought an evil report of them to his father." So Joseph is 17 years old at the time. He's almost a full-grown boy. He is the son of Rachel, the one he truly loved of the sisters. He was married to Leah and Rachel, and the sons of Bilhah and sons of Zilpah were the concubines who were attached to Leah and Rachel respectively. They also sired some of his sons, and Joseph, we can gather, is being a tattletale of them on this point. So he's ratting them out, essentially. He's doing what no brother really should. "And Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe." So Israel is Jacob. He had earned that name. He was given it as recently as Genesis 35. So that is who he is referring to when he says Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Now, the preferential treatment and the blatant favoritism did stimulate the jealousy, which provoked them to conspire to kill him. And the reason he was so beloved and treasured and esteemed, one, he was the son of his beloved wife, the apple of his eye, whom he had struggled to conceive with for some time. That is a common fate of the patriarchal wives, the difficulty to conceive. And but she dies giving birth to Joseph, his younger brother, so he is all that he really has left of her, and he's the son of his old age. And when we reach the more mature ages, we tend to spoil our children more. And so how does he spoil him? He makes him a long robe. This is alternately translated as beautiful or multicolored. So we gather this was no ordinary robe, and it provoked, the mere sight of it provoked the envy and provocations of his brothers. "But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they were not able to speak peaceably to him." So hate is no way to feel at all towards your brother, but they just couldn't contain or control their envy because they saw all his blessings and favoritism and seemingly at their expense, that was all being allotted to him because he was a little more gifted and a little more wise than them, and he's of a completely different character. Joseph would never kill his brothers, even when he was in the position to avenge them for having tried to kill him in the Pharaoh's palace, as we read of in Genesis 50. And Joseph dreamed a dream and told it to his brothers, so they hated him even more. Now, we don't know what the contents of the dream yet, so we're going to read that before we gauge just how much they hated him. And he said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have dreamed. See, we were binding sheaves in the midst of the field, and see, my sheaf rose up and also stood up. And see, your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." So his sheaf is symbolic and representative of himself. That means he's going to rise and they are going to bow at his presence. So he is the 17-year-old. He is the 10th or 11th born of the flock, and they do not take kindly to this young upstart, this tattletale, telling them that they are going to be bowing down for him. So that's why they hated him. And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Shall you indeed rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So they rejected the notion that they would ever be ruled by him. Little do they know that he survives their conspiracy to murder him in open blood, and he eventually finds himself down to Egypt, where he flourishes in the sight of the court because he was not only able to have dreams. Dreams were one of the communicational vehicles between Elohim and non-believers and believers alike throughout the the Old Testament especially. And so Joseph was not only able to have dreams, but they were interpretable. And this marks a revolutionary turning point, because Jacob's ladder, the last dream in which we read, this is distinctly symbolic, whereas the material which comes before it, the visual elements, are very straightforward, and the voices, such as when he visits Abimelech, we don't read of any visual details, but this one is highly symbolic. And he dreamed still another dream, and related it to his brothers, and said, "See, I have dreamed another dream, and see, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to me." And he related it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him, and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall we, your mother and I, and your brothers, indeed come to bow down before the earth to you?" So we already read that the same dream, of which the symbolism is essentially parallel. It means the same thing, that all of them are going to be bowed to them, including his father. So how does his father respond? Well, his father had been visited by authentic dreams. He was the similar receptacle, so he knew that Joseph knew something, and perhaps he spoke true, but he said, well, in the next verse it reads, "And his brothers envied him, but his father guarded the word." So his father was curious about it. He didn't just reject it out of hand. He was initially taken aback by the fact that his mother, by this time Leah, would have been the only surviving member, so that she would have been the matriarch of the family, and him should bow down before him and be ruled by him. But his father had been similarly visited, so he didn't envy the lad, but he was curious about it. And his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Remember, they're in Canaan. This is the land in the inhabitants of which, Canaanites, anytime we read those, we understand them to be the indigenous dwellers of what was to become the promised nation. Remember, they're in a pre-national family right now. The 12 sons will form the 12 tribes of Israel, and they're not going to become a nation until they go down into Egypt, but that's getting a little far ahead of ourselves. So Shechem is a location in the promised land. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding in Shechem? Come, and I send you to them. And he said to him, "Here I am." So by his immediate response, an unargumentative one, we gather that he was an obedient child. So his father fetches him to go and bring a report of his brothers who are shepherding in Shechem, and he obediently complies. He says, "Here I am." This is the same thing Isaiah said and Samuel said when they were called, or something similar. And he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers, and well with the sheep, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. This is some 50 miles away where he is to where he's going, and he does get lost en route, but he's asking him, who's a known tattletale amongst his brothers, to come and bring him a report. He knows he can expect the truth from Joseph, so if they're not doing all that they should be doing, he's going to tell them. So the mere sight of him coming at his father's behest would have provoked something aggressive in them, as we read. And a certain man found him, and see, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What do you seek? And he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please inform me where they are feeding their sheep. So this boy is, for all intents and purpose, lost at this time, so he needs the human assistance to be led to where his brothers are, but he's not too far away, as we read in the next verse. And the man said, They have left here, for I heard them say, Let us go towards Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers, and found them in Dothan. So this messenger does not steer him wrong. He steers him to the right place, and he is there to meet his brothers. Little does he know it would be his last meeting with them for a while. And they saw him from a distance, and before he came near them, they plotted against him to kill him. So there is no evidence of them having premeditated murder in their hearts before this moment in time, but it had been brewing in enough of them collectively to their collective rage was in a murderous frenzy at this point. They hated him, and when you hate in your heart, you are guilty of murder, according to the Master's exalted elevation of the Mosaic Law in Matthew 5:29 or something. And they said to each other, See, this master of dreams is coming. So they're mocking him. He had dreams. He told them his dreams. He explained them their meanings. That would have been his derogatory nickname. The masters of dreams is coming to tell them his latest vision, but they're not going to let him get through with it because they're going to kill him. Come and let us now kill him and throw him into some pit, and shall say, Some wild beast has devoured him. Let us then see what comes of his dreams. So they're going to try and cut his dreams premature. He had already been visited by a dream which told him that all his family would be bowing to him. Little do these brothers know that they are setting in motion the providential working which arranges for Joseph. They're going to leave him for dead. And try and frame it as some wild beast. It is ultimately through the intervention of the eldest brother, Reuben, that they sell him to slavery, thus keeping him alive. But he was left for dead, and as was the Messiah, but they didn't really kill him. He rose from the ground of slavery to the exalted throne, the right hand of the throne of the Father in heaven, much like Joseph would do at the right hand of the father of Pharaoh. But Reuben heard and rescued him from their hands. Let us not take his life. Reuben is the eldest born, and as such, he would have had the responsibility of protecting his brothers. So he's kind of the lone one in the crowd who doesn't want to outright kill him, but he does dutifully intervene with as the older brother to protect one of the younger ones from being outright killed by the envy of the brothers in between him and them. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood, throw him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, in order to rescue him out of their hands, and bring him back to his father. So he's suggesting that they don't actually stab him or kill him. They're going to throw him into this pit and leave him there for dead, and they're going to be he's going to be abducted there to some transpassing Ishmaelite traders who they eventually sell them to. So it came to be, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his robe, the long robe which was on him. So the mere sight of him coming in this robe would have only aggravated their envy, because remember, this was a visible reminder that the Father's affection for and esteem in him was greater than that which he reserved for themselves. So they tear at it like wolves and lions, and they leave nothing on him. And then they took him and throw him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So they had effectively left him for dead. You know, he had no water. He had no chance or source of living. Water is one's life source, and he didn't have any access to any. And from there, and they sat down to eat a meal, and they lifted their eyes and looked, and saw a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to take them down to Egypt. So while they're casually eating a meal, while they have effectively let their brother for dead, I don't know how one can do that, but these boys and young men were devoid of conscience, and they who should appear but Ishmaelites. These are descendants of Abraham's older son by the female servant Hagar, and they're coming from Gilead, making their way down to Egypt, bearing gifts to be traded, or items to be traded. And Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and conceal the blood?" So Judah is the one who we're going to meet in the 38th chapter, who gets into his little fling with Tamar, but he is also the ancestor of the Messiah, and the one tribe whose kingdom would, their ethnic purity would be preserved intact after the exiles. And he's asking, what good is it going to be to us if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? We can make a profit off him right now. Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh. And his brothers listen. So he's appealing to their common blood. This is not, after all, a man they should be killing, because he's from the same genetic fiber as them, but they have no qualms. They'll settle for selling him into slavery. And men, Midianite traders, passed by, so they pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So the going rate of a slave by Judas's time, the New Testament time, was 30 pieces of silver. Inflation was slightly slower to adjust between now and then, but this is some millennia and a quarter before that happened. So the going rate of slaves must have been 20 pieces of silver, and they take him and transplant him. In exchange for that amount of money, they bring him all the way down to Egypt, where they're going to sell him into slavery. So his brothers sold them into traders who became slave traders once they sold him, and they're going to sell him to his new owner in Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit, and see, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his garments. So Reuben may not have been present when Judah hatched this scheme to sell him into slavery, and he's mad at himself because, in spite of everything he had planned, he looked to be dead. And he returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's robe, killed a male goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. Now what's interesting here is that Jacob had deceived his father Isaac by dipping blood of a male goat, and this comes back to haunt him because his original name means deceiver. So his sons do the same trick on him. They dishonestly and deceptively use the suggestion of blood to implicate that their brother is gone and his son is gone. And sent the long robe and brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Please look. Is it the robe of your son or not?" So hardened were they in their hatred that even even after all this, they couldn't bring themselves to call him his brother. They referred to him as your son. So that is something we witness also in Luke's 15th chapter in reference to the obedient and faithful elder brother of the prodigal son, who refers to him as his son to his father and not his brother. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is torn to pieces." So he infers from the prop that they're holding before him that this was his robe. He recognized it as his. It is dipped in blood. Therefore, he can infer by connection, erroneously, but not unimaginably, that he was devoured in the flesh by wild beast. And Jacob took the garments and put sackcloth on his waist and mourned for his son many days. This is the ritual motions of ritualistic lamenting and mourning. It would to endow oneself in sackcloth, often pour ashes on oneself. But this is how Jacob mourned, and it's for many days. We don't know how many, but the grief probably never left him until he learned that his son had been alive and flourishing in Egypt. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "Now let me go down into the grave to my son in mourning." So his father wept for him. So he's determined right then and there to never get over the fact that his most beloved, his most special and blessed son was gone from him, and he mourned for him, and he was determined to keep mourning to him all the way to the grave and beyond. That is how beloved he was in the eyes of his father. And the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard. Now, sneak preview, we pick up on this in the 39th chapter after the interlude with Judah and Tamar. But Joseph so impresses his employer, this Potiphar, that he is given the chief, essentially exalted to the number 2 of his household, and he attracts the notice of his wife because he is a physically attractive man, we read, and his wife tries to seduce him, and when Joseph resists, she resorts to screaming rape, which lands him in prison. From there, he uplifts himself through his ability to interpret the dreams of which he was visited by twice, prophetic dreams with prophetic materials, these being in the cupbearer, the Pharaoh's cupbearer, whose fate is revealed that he's going to survive, and the baker is going to perish in 3 days. And then he eventually reveals the Pharaoh's dream, the details of which I've covered in Genesis 44, 1 through 40. But that's all the time we have for now today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.